Good day, friends. In this second installment of our series on St. Ignatius, we're going to look at the period of about 15 years between the time of his conversion until the time he arrived in Rome, a period when he went from being a vagrant pilgrim through studies to finally ordination and his arrival in Rome, where he would spend the rest of his life. Thanks for your attention. There'll be one more episode coming after this one.
In the first installment of this series, we followed the life of Ignatius from his birth at Loyola in 1541 until the experience of his conversion and the beginnings of the spiritual exercises. Ignatius, as you recall, left his family after he recovered from his near-fatal wound and made his way first to the monastery of Montserrat outside of Barcelona, and then to a small town nearby where, for a period of about 11 months through 1523, he studied, he prayed, he fasted, and there, after long sufferings, he has a great experience, an enlightenment experience that he called the most important of his life. And from that experience and from what he learned listening to the voice of the Lord, he begins to distill his experience into jottings that eventually will evolve into his spiritual exercises. His vision, though, was still resolutely medieval. He decided that he would outdo the saints in valor and would travel to the Holy Land there single-handedly to conquer that land back for Christ. He leaves via Barcelona, he crosses Italy, he finds a ship and begs his way to the Holy Land, where he lands and is allowed to remain only a few weeks. The Franciscan guardians of the holy places realized that this strange man who had no holy orders, who had no training, who came as a lay missionary, didn't fit any of the categories, and they put him back on the first boat they could find to get him back into Europe. It was on that voyage back that Ignatius realized that if he was going to be useful, he needed to have training. He needed to have a union card, if you will. And so it was that at the age of 30, he goes back to grammar school. He sits with young boys and learns his Latin ABCs and the rudiments of literature and the very beginnings of philosophy for 2 long years. At the end of those 2 long years, he makes his way to the city of Alcalá, one of the great university cities of Spain. All the while, he's speaking to people about the things of God, and this was suspicious, at least, in the Spain of the Spanish Inquisition, a layman speaking without any kind of church sanction. And so it was that he was arrested there by the Inquisition and was imprisoned for a period of time and examined. After a while, he made his way then to the city of Salamanca, where the same fate befell him, that he needed to answer for his teachings, which were orthodox, and he realized at that point, when he was finally cleared by the Inquisition, that the only hope for him was to have a serious university education. And so it was that he made his way to Paris, the great university city of Europe, and in 1528 he travels there and begins his studies in the center of the largest city in Europe at the time. And it's there that almost immediately he begins to attract a circle of very talented young men, young Catholic seminarians largely, who were looking to make sense of their times and place, to work in the world as the Protestant Reformation is just beginning to crash over Europe, and they find in Ignatius a leader and a guide. Those were years of study, yes, but they were also years of travels. Ignatius went from Paris to the Low Countries, which were under Spanish control in 1529 and 1530. He goes to Ghent and Antwerp to beg for help from Spanish merchants, even made his way to London, where he encountered people at the court of Henry VIII, though not the king. He returns to Paris. There he obtains first a bachelor's degree, and then finally in 1535 a master's degree. And there he encounters these remarkable men. Francis Xavier, who was a prince from, or at least of royal descent, from Navarre in northern Spain. Pierre Favre from southern France, whom was one of the very first of Ignatius's followers, and whom Ignatius said ultimately delivered the spiritual exercises better than anyone else. In this group, another Spaniard, Giacomo Lainez, who became the second general of the society, Alfonso Salmeron, another Spaniard, who became a distinguished theologian, Simão Rodriguez, an unstable man who caused Ignatius no end of heartaches towards the end of his life, Rodriguez, a Portuguese, and three Frenchmen, Pascal Brouet, Jean Codur, and Claude J. That becomes the kernel of the Society of Jesus. Ignatius receives his diploma, sealed with the Great Seal of the university, and as the companions, as they called themselves, began to think about what would be next, they gathered together on the Feast of the Assumption in 1535 in August, and made a promise together that they would remain affiliated to one another, and that they would, again following Ignatius's earlier very romantic dream, gather together and go to conquer the Holy Land together. And they added the proviso that if that didn't work out, they would then put themselves at the disposition of the Holy See. So Ignatius travels from Paris back to his native Spain. He visits friends and relations in Spain, and then finally makes his way to Venice in northern Italy, where he encounters the other companions. There they do a blitz of what we would call now social and pastoral ministries. They worked in hospitals for the incurables, hospitals for plague victims and victims of venereal diseases. They preached and taught in a variety of different social and religious contexts. Eventually, though, it came time for them to decide what to do. They looked again towards the adventure of Jerusalem. The sea lanes were closed by the Turks at that point, so rather than embarking, they decided to make their way to Rome. On the way, Ignatius is ordained a priest, and more than a year later, when he finally reaches Rome in 1537, he celebrates his first Mass at the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome, at the altar of the crib near these figures that still exist today by Arnolfo da Cambio. Eventually, in the fall of 1537, he makes his way south from Venice, accompanied by two of the brothers, and outside of Rome, just a few miles north of Rome, he has the second great vision of his life, where he sees Jesus carrying his cross, and Jesus asks the Father to put Ignatius in his company and allow him to help in the work of carrying his cross. And the Father consents. And Ignatius, as he heard Jesus say, "I will be good to you, propitious to you in Rome," and he later told one of his companions he thought that meant that they would be martyred in Rome. They've arrived in Rome. They began another blitz of social and pastoral work, preaching, teaching, welcoming the poor during the season of terrible famine in 1537-38. And they decided during that period, after long consideration, that they would join together as a group, and they would ask for papal approval. And so it was that in 1540, Ignatius was at that point 50 years old, they presented a sketch of their new religious order to the Pope, and it was approved. Their congregation had a number of novelties. perhaps the most striking was that they decided that they were going to be urban missionaries. Monks had traditionally retreated to the mountaintops to study and pray. Even the Franciscans and the Dominicans, although they worked in cities and had their monasteries typically on the outskirts of the cities, kept at least one eye metaphorically on the hills. Ignatius, on the other hand, settled almost immediately as close as he could get to the dead center of Rome, and we'll consider that more next time. And very soon, even before he was elected superior general, his companionship began to become a companionship of men in dispersion. 2 by 2, he sends them out, their first 10 or 12 of them, to different missions around the world, from Ireland to Xavier going to India. Later on, one of his most important followers would say, "The world is our monastery and the road is our home." The Rome that they inhabited in 1540 was a place recovering from the sack of 1527, a city that was still growing out of the ruins of the fall of the Roman Empire and the difficulties of the Dark Ages that followed that. It was a place, though, full of opportunities, with the papal court, with the possibilities to reach important people and to educate young seminarians. It was there that Ignatius was elected the first superior general, and with his companions, those who were still in Rome at least, he gathers at the Church of St. Paul outside the walls, and in front of this icon of the Blessed Virgin, they pronounce their vows. And at the same time, they received their first headquarters, a chapel dedicated to Our Lady, a run-down mortuary chapel of a noble family in the center of Rome that bore this lovely image of Our Lady with the child Jesus that was recently restored to its original color and style. It is in that place and in the midst of the city of Rome that Ignatius settles and spends the last 15 years of his life. We might say he took off his walking shoes and there led the society that he had founded in the company of his friends into a worldwide mission.